threat of war grows daily as American troops pour into the Persian Gulf. Soldiers are already calling it the Second Gulf War. Welcome to the History Channel. I'm Arthur Kent with the 3rd Infantry Division here at Fort Stewart, Georgia. In 1991, immediately after the First Gulf War, British journalist David Frost interviewed some of the Allied coalition leaders. He spoke with an emotional President Bush Sr., a triumphant General Norman Schwarzkopf, Colin Powell, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and others. The interviews are provocative, insightful, and instructive for those preparing to confront Saddam Hussein yet again. Join us now as the History Channel presents David Frost and Lessons from the Gulf War Leaders.
It is that clear that if we don't check this aggression, and if the United Nations fails, and all of us therein, therefore, it would follow, fail in our responsibilities, the price tag tomorrow will be far greater than the price tag today.
That was December the 16th, 1990, in the Oval Office. Today, the United States and its allies stand on the verge of a second confrontation with Saddam Hussein. Most of the Western leaders from 1991 are no longer in command. But the adversary remains the same. And the menace, some say, greater than ever. Most discussions of the First Gulf War begin where the last one ended, or didn't end. But what was clear for George Bush at the outset was a philosophy of engagement, one which he shared with Colin Powell. The general's lesson is lesson number 1. Know how to end a war before you start one.
Well, he had a formula that I adopted as mine. Define the mission, how are you going to accomplish the mission, and when are your kids coming home? Those are 3 major points in what I think was Powell's philosophy, and I know it's mine.
We move now to Camp David, where everyone, the President, General Brent Scowcroft, Marlin Fitzwater, and Barbara Bush, were all weary from the strain of the war that had so recently ended. The President reads from his diary, the entry date January the 15th, 2 days before the air war was launched.
I'm having trouble with how this ends. I was about to go to work early in the morning, 6:45. Say the air attack is devastating and Saddam gets done in by his own people. How do they stop? How do we keep from having overkill? Most people don't see this as a scenario because they're convinced it can be long and drawn out with numerous body bags on the U.S. side. And you have to wrestle and try to find the proper formula. I hope the air is so devastating that will bring Saddam to his knees, but then what? How do you quit? How do we get his million-man army to leave their weapons and go back to their villages? He cannot leave his armor intact. So these were some of the things that I was thinking of as kept saying to Brent, how do we end this? We want to put this in right. We had discussions in here about whether there'd be a Ceausescu-like finish to this guy. What would be the reaction inside? Of course, we haven't gotten to that point now in history, and hope that they'll reorder their society. Hope that there'll be no terror at American installations and embassies. I worried about that once the war started. Hope to see the madman is gone. Not that the Yankee imperialist unleashed an unreasonable force against an Arab brother. I mean, these are some of the thoughts I had just before we had to do what we had to do.
And we all know what that was. But then later there was mounting controversy about the timing of the war's end. What you're about to hear from General Schwarzkopf turned into something of a media bombshell. Though invading Iraq was no part of the UN mandate in 1991, in retrospect, this option has seemed increasingly attractive to many with the passage of time.
No, we didn't declare a ceasefire. What we did is we suspended offensive operations. Frankly, my recommendation had been you know, continue to march. I mean, we had them on in a route, and we could have continued to, you know, great destruction upon them. We could have completely closed the door and made it, in fact, a battle of annihilation. And the president, you know, made the decision that, you know, that we should stop at a given time, at a given place. That did leave some escape routes open for them to get back out, and I think it was a very humane decision and a very courageous decision on his part also. Because it's, you know, it's one of those ones that historians are going to second guess, you know, forever. Why, you know, why didn't we go for one more day versus why did we stop when we did, when we had them completely routed? We're already getting the questions, well, they really weren't there in as much force as they said they were because you've only captured X number, you've only got Y number of estimated dead, and therefore it doesn't compute. Well, there were obviously a lot of people that escaped who wouldn't have escaped if the decision hadn't been made, you know, to stop us right where we were at that time. But again, I think that was a very courageous decision on the part of the president.
Went to the talks about the ceasefire and so on, and you made those arrangements. Looking back now, what angers you most about their infractions or breaches? Is it to do with the use of helicopters to suppress the civilian population? Is it the reports of napalm? What breaches of what they promised you that day anger you most?
Now, let me make very clear that this is Norm Schwarzkopf's personal opinion, okay, and it's certainly not a position of the government or anything like that. I think they suckered me. I think that when they asked me to use helicopters, at that time, you see, nothing was flying over Iraq, and we had said, you will not fly over Iraq. And they looked me straight in the eye and said, well, you know, you've destroyed all of our bridges, you know, you've destroyed all of our roads, and therefore it's hard to get around the country. We would like to fly our helicopters, and the purpose of flying those helicopters will be for transportation of government officials. So when they said to me, you know, we would like to fly helicopters, I said, not over our forces. Oh, no, definitely not over your forces, just over Iraq, because for the transportation of government officials, that seemed like a reasonable request, and within my charter, I felt that that was something that it was perfectly all right to grant. I think I was suckered.
Ceasefire negotiations in Safwan, effectively ending the first Gulf War, some leaders urged that Saddam be forced to come out with his hands up, as it were, some form of personal humiliation. Mrs. Thatcher, no longer in power, wanted to take it one step further. But first, Colin Powell.
I don't think you ever would have gotten Saddam to come to Safwan. We had made a fundamental political choice at the very beginning that we did not want Iraq broken up. We did not want Iraq so decimated with respect to its military capability that it would be incredibly vulnerable to an even more hostile Iran.
The fact is Saddam Hussein is there, and we cannot trust Iraq while he is there. You will see, if you go back and look at the debates and the answers to questions in the House of Commons, that we were warning the Iraqis and warning Saddam Hussein and the people who served under him and his troops, that if they carried out brutalities which were totally and utterly against international law, we should attempt to see they were brought before an international court to answer for their crimes. I'm afraid that has not been done. In my view, it should have been. And we should have asked that he be yielded up to stand international trial, because that's what we said. That's what we gave the impression we were going to do. And unfortunately, it seemed to get lost in the ceasefire.
I mean, I cannot envision a government of Iraq handing over Saddam to the World Court to do so. I may be proven wrong, so I guess philosophically I certainly agree with you, but practically what normally happens to people like Saddam Hussein is at some point they are taken care of by their own folks.
Do you think that we could have demanded the handing over of Saddam, done something to him? Could we have demanded he turn up at Safwan and kneel before General Schwarzkopf or whatever? I mean, could we have done...
I think maybe in retrospect we could have done more. Whether we could have had as a sine qua non Saddam showing up in that tent and handing over his sword or having a ceremony which would visibly increase his personal humiliation, I don't know. The alternative was, well, suppose we demand he come and he says, I'm not going to show up. Then what do? Say, we're going to come get you? And then if he says, well, that's what it's going to take, then we are an occupying force in an Arab land.
You're watching Lessons from the...
Just before the first Gulf War, the President told me about an Amnesty International report detailing the brutality of the Iraqis after they invaded Kuwait City. The report spoke about the torturing of handicapped children, the shooting of young boys in front of their parents, and the like. The President said, I'm afraid I'd get very emotional if I described any more of it. A few months earlier, the Emir of Kuwait came to see President Bush with an eyewitness account of the savagery Iraqi troops had unleashed on his countrymen. The President listened intently to the Emir. No doubt he was aware of our next lesson. Lesson 2, don't let emotions affect key decisions.
I think my danger was overreact. I mean, there's a danger of a president making a dumb move because of emotions. But when he told us about firsthand about the brutality, and then that later was followed by this Amnesty International report, I got everybody I saw, they said, this president's flipped. And I got very emotional about it, and I kept saying to myself, and I calm down, don't let these human rights abuses, bitter and ugly as they are, I mean, the torture, the medieval torture, don't let that make you do something dumb. But I'll tell you, I got emotionally involved in that, and it didn't end until close to the end of the war.
Mrs. Bush, too, was well aware of the emotional strain on her husband.
This was written on January 16th, and it says, for the past 12 hours, I've done something so dreadful I can't even imagine it. But anyway, then down here it says, this past week has been tough for George. All of America's been at prayer, and we have also. I'm so proud of him. He remains on course, steady, stable, and kind. He told me last night that it's always on his mind. And as we said our prayers, and as he read his message to the American people that he will give tonight, his voice cracked and he fought off tears. And I think it's the innocent children that get to him.
You've had incredible pressure over the past 7 months, ending in joy. You've had the emotional pressures of finding out what was going on in Kuwait, of the responsibility of ordering our boys into a battle from which they might not return, and so on. What was the most emotional moment of this whole last 7 months for you?
Oh, Lord, there were several, but just any thought of the loss of a life. The sign that says, bring my husband home safe. I said when I came into this job, I would never plead for sympathy from people about this being the loneliest and toughest, and this wasn't a lonely period. But there was a certain burden, and it related to the responsibility for the lives of others.
And that was the...
That was the toughest, yeah, because you just don't need that.
When you see 17 and 18-year-olds...
Oh, God. But that goes with the territory. I mean, that you just have to accept that. But I must say...
In moments like that, do you pray more than ever
Oh, yeah.
before in your life? Hmm?
Yeah.
It's a hell of a responsibility that you probably wouldn't wish on anyone else. But you handled it.
That was the tough part.
President Bush had strong emotions, but he knew how to keep them under control, an essential qualification for a commander-in-chief. Colin Powell knew this lesson from combat experience.
I was a soldier, and I knew what being a soldier was all about, but the first time in combat in Vietnam, when somebody is actually shooting at you and you're hearing rounds going over your head, is a very frightening experience, and I think every soldier has gone through that. What you have to learn to do is to, as we discussed earlier, control it. Control your fear, control your emotions, and keep getting on with the job.
Getting on with the job clearly means setting aside emotions. As with the commanders, the soldiers on the battlefront also have to put emotions aside and get down to business.
If, on the other hand, we have to go to war, then we don't want our hands tied behind our back. We're going to do it 100% all the way and do whatever is necessary to inflict maximum casualties on the enemy and minimum on our own forces. And that's sort of the two extremes that you're at. You don't like anything that's in between.
And when you say about inflicting maximum damage and so on, given what you feel about the desirability of a war never taking place, being anti-war, as you were saying, and so on, and you're fierce and in defending the lives of your own soldiers and so on, what attitude does a military man with a conscience like you've got, what attitude do you take to the 50 or 100,000 deaths on the other side? I mean, how does one feel about those when it's all over?
I feel two ways. Number one, I regret the death of anyone. Number two, we only had 150 people killed. And the reason why we only had 150 people killed is because we so fiercely went after them that we struck terror in their hearts. And that resulted in I mean, 50,000 or 100,000 or 150 or whatever of them to be killed. I guess I could put it another way. If this battle had gone on for 6 months, there would have been a whole lot more than 50 or 100 or 150. But you don't pursue a battle worried about the casualties you inflict upon the enemy. The war was not our choosing. The war was their choosing. They had ample opportunity to avoid the war. Sherman said, what was it that Sherman said? You know, war is the remedy that our enemy has chosen, therefore let them have as much of it as they want.
What's the greatest lesson you've learned out of all this?
I think there's so many lessons, but I think that there's one really fundamental military truth. And that's that you can add up the correlation of forces, you can look at the number of tanks, you can look at the number of airplanes, you can look at all of these factors of military might and put them together. But unless the soldier on the ground or the airman in the air has the will to win, has the strength of character to go into battle, believes that his cause is just, and has the support of his country. Unless you have that, all the rest of that stuff is irrelevant.
No one in America would accuse the White House of trying to appease a bully. And certainly the current President Bush has made progress in bringing along the United Nations. But many believe that there are ways short of an attack to bottle up Saddam. Rigorous inspections, economic containment, or just patience. George Bush told me years ago, the tyrant will go. But as he put it, I can't give you a date. In victory, the leaders were confident that Saddam knew the high price he would pay if he stepped out of line. Through no fault of their own, that didn't happen. All of which takes us to our next lesson. Lesson 3, never appease a bully or make idle threats.
I'm no star historian, David. I've got lots to learn still. But I wasn't the first one to call Saddam Hussein a Hitler. The Arab countries threatened, Saudi Arabia and others used that analogy, and they were absolutely right. He's totally there's no redemption there in the part of Saddam Hussein.
We cannot trust Saddam Hussein or Iraq. We can never trust Iraq while Saddam Hussein is in power.
Do you foresee any circumstances in which there will be further military action against Saddam Hussein?
Well, if I could foresee such circumstances, I probably wouldn't announce it here. But I can see circumstances. Somebody mishandling some UN observers that are there under under resolutions by the Security Council, sure. But again, we're keeping our options open. And he is going to comply with these resolutions. And we have some muscle out there, so do some other countries.
There are circumstances, are there not, in which we, the coalition, would not rule out the resumption of ground and/or air warfare if he sinned?
He knows what the coalition expects of him. He knows what has happened in the past. He knows the international community will expect him to behave properly, but I wouldn't wish to go further than that.
I know you're being discreet, but why not?
I don't think it would be productive, frankly. He knows exactly what has happened as a result of his misbehavior in the past. He knows that. He doesn't need to be told it. He doesn't need remarks to be hurled at him. In his heart, he knows the strength of the Allied forces against him. He knows the extent of the world condemnation against him. He knows the changes that the Iraqis are actually going to have to make in their policies. All of those things he understands. When you go back and look at Saddam Hussein's record, he's lied at every turn. He has never stopped lying. And so therefore, we're not about to, and they've told us on several other occasions since then, oh, you have to trust us. And you're almost tempted to come back and say, why? Why should we trust you at all, given the long-established record of lies that you have behind you? So we're not going to trust them. We're going to continue to keep our guard up until such time as there is, in fact, a ceasefire that's been declared. And we are very, very sure that no one, absolutely no one out there on the battlefield is going to take offensive action against us. And I mean anyone who does is going to pay a price for it.
George Bush was the master diplomat, experienced and well-connected. War was the option of last resort. But when the Allies commenced hostilities, Bush wanted to be clear that the compelling motive behind the Allied action was spelled out in moral terms. And in victory, when the US Army had the Iraqis in their crosshairs, Bush wanted the world to note how American soldiers behaved in the field. Clearly, Bush wanted the civilized world behind him, before and after the conflict. Lesson 4, in conflict, capture the moral high ground.
I spent endless hours on the telephone to countries large and small, trying to explain as carefully as I could what the objectives were, how we plan to achieve these objectives. And so I believe in personal diplomacy. A communist leader is not going to change the philosophy of his government if he likes you. But if a person thinks because he has a personal contact with you and he knows you're going to tell him the truth and he knows you're going to level with him, then that credibility that comes from that can lead to smoother diplomatic relations. It's so clear to me. Well, you conduct yourself without arrogance. You lead. You are considerate to the concerns of other countries, large and small. But you stand for something once again. And that gives us a new credibility, and it gives us a new force with which to help solve heretofore intractable problems. The obvious one is the problems of the West Bank, Palestine, but we got a lot of others that are going to still be out there.
There were so many possible and actual reasons for taking the action that you did, but if looking back on it, I can think of 4, I wondered which of those was preeminent in your mind. There was that he could end up with a noose around the world's oil supplies, that he had violated the sovereignty of Kuwait, that he was close, we thought, to getting a nuclear bomb, so it was now or never, and 4th, because he was, in your own words, irredeemably bad. What was the most preeminent of those 4 concerns in your mind?
Well, I think, it's hard to not use hindsight, but I think the most preeminent would have been the fact that he aggressed against a neighbor, bullied a neighbor, a member of the United Nations, and took it over without paying a price. I think that, now, the taking over the world's oil supply, or a large part of it, would have devastated Europe and would have devastated the United States, would have driven the price of oil way up past the speculative levels it got to. But I think the moral imperative was, hey, this aggression will not stand, and I think that enabled us to form a coalition that transcended just economic interests.
President Bush was very concerned about America doing the right thing, why we got into the war, and how our troops behaved when we got out of it.
My view of America's was when the Iraqis came out of that foxhole. We saw it on CNN and every place, and they thought they were going to be killed, and the Americans said, we're American soldiers, we're not going to hurt you.
Saddam Hussein is a vexing enigma. Recently, he opened the jails of Iraq and freed thousands of hardened convicts. During the last Gulf War, in the 11th hour, he released Western hostages for no appreciable reason or advantage. If nothing else, Saddam is unpredictable. But he's probably not mad, and he's canny, and he's ruthless. Our next lesson: understand your enemy's mind.
What was the psychological profile you were working to? Were you assuming this man is clever and cunning, or crazy like a fox? I mean, what was your psychological profile of your adversary? Do you think he's mad?
I don't think he's mad. I think that he... Someone once asked me, what's the difference between me and Saddam Hussein? The answer is, I have a conscience and he doesn't. If you look at the way he has risen to power, it has been over dead bodies and murders, and I think he has no, absolutely no conscience, no regard for views that the taking of human life is just one more step in his progress to the top. I think he's a megalomaniac. Now maybe the maniac part means that there's a certain degree of madness there, but I don't think he's mad. I just think he absolutely had illusions of grandeur as the next Nebuchadnezzar, and he was going to be the unifier of the Arab world, but that Arab world was going to be unified under his conditions with him at the top.
And a man who has no conscience is another way of saying you really regarded him as evil in a way.
Oh, I think there's no question about it. In my mind, he is an evil man.
He is an evil person who has stayed in power through intimidation, murder, assassination for 25 years, and he's very, very good at it. And he certainly has brought nothing but death and destruction to his own country.
I can't think of anybody, any individual that's more unpredictable or worse than Saddam Hussein.
In addition to being irredeemably bad, in retrospect, do you think he is partially mad?
Wacko? I don't think so. From what I've, you know, the psychological profiles, but he's brutal. I mean, maybe you have to be mad to personally kill people. Maybe you have to be mad to make such crazy decisions that you have nobody in your corner. So I don't know, but I guess I'd have to stop short of saying that he's certifiably nuts.
I think Saddam had demonstrated he was quite content for us to kill every Iraqi soldier in the Kuwaiti theater of operations.
One of the most fascinating moments in the hours I spent interviewing former President Bush was when he talked about the lack of a clear communication line to Saddam Hussein. His point was that Saddam needed to be told in terms he would both understand and believe that America and its allies were serious about doing battle with him. Of all the lessons that can be learned from 1991, this may be one of the most important. Lesson 6. Make sure Saddam gets the message. We return now to Camp David with Barbara Bush, She's telling us of a Thanksgiving visit to US troops in the Gulf and a stopover visit with Germany's Chancellor Helmut Kohl.
We had a fascinating, really, couple of hours in Germany where Helmut Kohl and George spoke, and it gets a little bit back to what you're saying, because Helmut kept saying, we've got to get word to Saddam Hussein that we have the troops, and they really are there, and we're going to beat him. And George told Saddam at that time, I remember that, told Helmut that the problem is you can't send it through normal ways that would then get to a lower fella who worked for him, because he shot the messenger. Isn't that?
Yeah, and you never knew whether it was getting...
That's fair. Did we ever, in this whole 7-month period, have a private line to Saddam Hussein where we could be sure of getting a message through to him by a messenger who didn't get shot? I mean, did we have any really reliable intermediaries at all?
We had reliable formal intermediaries, the Swiss, but whether the actual got there with the proper emphasis, I don't think so. Do you, Brad?
No, but I think people told him. I think Primakov, for example, when he went down there, had to have told him, at least according to Gorbachev, that we...
Out to Saddam, well prior to the 1990-1991 conflict, seemed fruitless.
We tried, through contacts with Saddam Hussein and opening the door a little bit and getting congressional delegation over there, tried to bring him along. We reached out. We tried to have better relations in commerce. We were concerned and made our concerns clear about chemical, biological, and all of this. We tried with him. We tried that. And, contacts and commerce and sending people and moving our diplomatic relations forward.
For his part, it seemed that Saddam did not get the message from his enemy, the Allies. And for that failure, Saddam would pay heavily.
I'll tell you what I do think. I think he didn't think we'd use force. I think he felt that in a hypothetical way, if we did use force, that he would fight us to a standoff in the desert. He knew we had sophisticated, smart bomb technology, but he saw back in Vietnam it wasn't quite as smart as we thought it was. He didn't know about the huge technological advances that had been made, or if he did, he discounted it. He discounted the will of the American people and of the coalition leaders. He didn't feel that we wanted to fight. I think that's his greatest mistake, was that he miscalculated. He didn't believe I meant what I said. He didn't believe that the American people would back the president, because he listened to the debate in the Congress and he listened to the protest movements, and he read or had reported the editorials, and he watched CNN. And when he saw the press coverage of support for the president and opposition to the president, two stories for every one of opposition, he thought that was the mood of the country. He thought that I wouldn't do what I said I'd do, and he had every reason in the world to believe that.
The Gulf War commanders all had differing opinions about how strong or weak Saddam was. General Schwarzkopf thought the battle could take as much as 3 weeks, as opposed to the 100 hours it took. Indeed, in 1991, John Major thought that Saddam was within 2 years of acquiring nuclear weapons. With all of America's intelligence and those of its coalition Arab allies, assessing the enemy's strength was still at best problematic. To be sure, the picture was cloudy. This time around, the stakes of miscalculation could be even greater, because the weaponry at issue probably includes more chemical and biological components. So we should heed lesson 7. When you think you know the enemy's strength, think again.
Do you think that Saddam Hussein had more or less chemical, biological, and nuclear capacity than we thought at the time?
I think he proved to have more. I think recent history shows that he was further advanced in the nuclear field than we thought he was. I think we accurately assessed where he stood in terms of chemical, and I'm just not knowledgeable on whether we were right on target or not on the biological. We knew that he'd use chemical weapons. One of my big worries as Commander-in-Chief, which was shared by our military, was the fact that he might use chemical weapons.
Even chemicals, they would have had to do far more than just have a chemical warhead. They would have had to have a chemical warhead with an airburst capability, and they would have had enough accuracy so you see they could fire a salvo of these things in and have them all burst in some sort of a pattern to lay down a large cloud of chemical weapons. That's why we were never really terribly concerned about the chemical capability of the Scud, because even if they had a chemical warhead, and there was a lot of questions whether they did or not, we knew that they didn't have an airburst capability, which meant the missile would have come in, impacted the ground, exploded there, and that would give them a very limited area that those chemicals would have affected.
They had more Scud launches than we thought, didn't they?
Yes, yeah, they certainly did.
They had, what, 200 rather than 35?
Well, we don't know. I don't think we know. One of the figures I read recently is they had 15 battalions of 15 launchers each, and that adds up, I mean, it multiplies out to be 225. And that was a lot more than we thought, because the maximum estimate that we had prior to the beginning was 48. And in fact, at one point, right before we launched the hostilities, we had pretty good intelligence that they had a maximum of only 18. So by the time we had destroyed 16 of them, I was feeling pretty confident. As a matter of fact, I made the statement, well, I was limiting my numbers, but I was pretty confident that we were really doing a job on them, and I think that night deliberately they launched a whole salvo to prove me wrong.
Even in battle, the commanders had difficulty in assessing the enemy's strength.
There was no question about the fact that the campaign objectives that we established for ourselves were accomplished. The enemy was being kicked out of Kuwait, was going to be gone from Kuwait. We had destroyed the Republican Guard as a militarily effective force.
Had you totally destroyed it? I mean, in the sense, Egypt and Syria wanted to carry on and destroy it a bit more, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of how do you define the word destroy? The Republican Guard was a militarily ineffective force, and we had inflicted great damage upon them, and they had been routed. Now, obviously, you know, we didn't destroy them to the very last tank.
A later report from the CIA revealed that about 50% of the Republican Guard had in fact escaped back home. Why didn't we just go in there and get him? Some commentators said after the Gulf War. But we have to be aware that that's not easy. Finding him is difficult enough, capturing him even more so. That's why Lesson 8 is tracking Saddam in downtown Baghdad. Good luck.
We never knew exactly where he was, did we?
Well, look, we couldn't find him. We didn't know where he was. But I'd say this isn't unique to downtown Baghdad, where he is the most secure of despot in the entire world. Look at Somalia. We were in the dusty streets of Mogadishu, certainly not underground bunkers and tunneled palaces, and they couldn't find Aidid. Now, how are we going to find Saddam Hussein? With whose life? You know, whose life are we going to put into a fruitless hunt like that? And there would we be, downtown Baghdad, an occupying America, occupying an Arab land, searching for this brutal dictator who had the best security in the world, involved in an urban guerrilla war. That is not a formula that I wanted to contemplate, and I think history will say we did the right thing.
The fighting would then have gone on for some time. It would have been necessary perhaps to go into Baghdad and get him. A lot of people would have been killed in doing so, not only innocent Iraqi civilians, but also Iraqi soldiers and no doubt British troops as well. I think there would have been a lot of bloodshed in order to get Saddam Hussein out. Willingly have come out and willingly surrendered himself in the interests of the Iraqi people, and as he should have been necessary to go in and bring him out. And I think in the context of the time, that would have cost a lot of lives.
Everybody felt that Saddam Hussein could not stay in office, certainly stay in office as long as he stayed in office. And I miscalculated. I thought he'd be gone, but I wasn't alone. The people in the Arab world felt, you know, with unanimity that he would be out of there. I think all observers felt that. He will be. At some point he will be. But not through, you know, I mean, I think he's going to be thrown out eventually.
Hopefully not through old age. Before old age.
He's a little younger than I am, so, but no, but I've been wrong on the fact that he would be in power this long, and so were a lot of other people wrong on that. And I'm damned unhappy about it too, because he's brutalizing his own people to this day. I think there's a real isolation on his part. There's a brutality, keeping people from getting food and medicine that they can get under the UN resolutions. And it is my understanding that people are getting more and more discontented with this brutal dictator as each day goes by. But I can't give you a date. But history will show a tyrant of that nature simply cannot last forever by brutalizing his own people.
When the day comes and Saddam falls, the question will be, what next? Right now, Iraqi exile leaders in London and Washington are naturally itching to return, a bit like what we've seen in Afghanistan. But as the leaders from 1991 remind us all too clearly, Lesson 9, don't count on instant democracy in Iraq.
When you look at that part of the world, including Iraq, we are not looking at democracies now. So you have to put the case for what the case is about. And the case is about aggression. It is about stability and security in an area that is vital to the rest of the world. But the ending wasn't quite as clean as it might have been if Saddam Hussein had come to the tent, laid it down his thing, and maybe left office. I mean, that would have been the cleanest possible ending, because then everybody could have started over with Iraq, even though there wouldn't have been an instantly, you know, human rights-led democracy, and tried to bring them into the family of nations. So that would have been those scenarios would have been much cleaner.
I never thought that he would simply disappear or be thrown out of power merely because he had been beaten in Kuwait. This is a canny gentleman who has been around for some 25 years, or something like that. And he has security forces to protect him. I don't think he was hanging around in one of those castles or palaces or bunkers for us to hit. The safest place for him to be would have been a lawn chair out in a date grove somewhere. And so I was quite sure he would physically survive the onslaught. And I think it was just wishful thinking that somehow his security forces would take him down. And if they had taken him down, what would he have been replaced with? I mean, the regime is a singular regime of an extended clan that comes from generally the town of Tikrit. And to think that there was some wonderful Jeffersonian figure that just couldn't wait to start learning how to do democracy and nation building is a bit naive.
Of all the lessons and observations we've heard in the course of the past hour, one has a particular resonance for me. It was when General Schwarzkopf recalled what he said was one really fundamental military truth, quote, "You can look at the number of tanks, you can look at the number of airplanes, you can look at all these factors of military might and put them together. But unless the soldier on the ground or the airman in the air has the will to win, has the strength of character to go into battle, believes that his cause is just, and has the support of his country, unless you have that, all the rest of that stuff is irrelevant."
Secretary of State Colin Powell, along with Vice President Dick Cheney, are the only Allied leaders from the first Gulf War to be confronting Saddam Hussein a second time. Operation Desert Storm was a triumph for them, but then the war was short, only 43 days. U.S. casualties were light, and most of the world had joined the coalition against Iraq. None of that can be taken for granted today. The History Channel will continue with our perspective on current events. I'm Arthur Kent. Stay with us, because history matters.